So shalom, everyone, and welcome to the third program in our Talking Memory series, Crafting Heritage, the Art of Holocaust Remembrance, a homage to David Friedman. The subject of today's program is Art as Artist as Witness, the Holocaust art of David Friedman in the Lodz Ghetto. And our guest speaker today is Miriam Friedman Morris, the daughter of David Friedman. My name is Medin Shahar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as a guide and an educator. I want to welcome our global audience, including friends and colleagues from Holocaust museums, institutions, and centers, Jewish heritage institutions, academics and students from universities, historians, and our many friends who attend our Talking Memory series. A special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today. And I want to acknowledge that today is International Holocaust Survivor Day and recognize their courage and resilience as we vow to continue to tell their stories, your stories. And once again, we want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. This series is in partnership with the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center in South Africa, and Classrooms Without Borders in the United States. And now, finally, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Miriam Friedman Morris. Miriam is the daughter, as we stated before, of Auschwitz survivors David and Hildegard Friedman. David Friedman, a renowned Berlin artist during the interwar years, painted his experiences for the world to see. After his death, Morris was driven to carry on his mission to show his Holocaust art to the world, succeeding with exhibitions in the United States, Germany, Czechia, and Israel. Fascination with her father's Nazi-looted art inspired a second quest to find lost works and ensure his rightful place in history. The pursuit launched a worldwide revival of an artist obscured by the Nazi regime. Morris, who lives in New York, facilitates exhibitions, contributes to educational projects, lectures, and writes. She dedicates her work to preserving and bringing attention to his art, to her father's art and legacy. And we are so happy to have you with us today to tell your story and your father's story, and especially about his artwork in the Lodz Ghetto. So Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Medin. I am delighted with this opportunity to show my father's Lodz Ghetto art and thank the Ghetto Fighters House and sponsors. My father would have been emotional with this honor. He bore witness to Nazi Germany's killing of innocents and titled his art series Because They Were Jews. His burning desire was to show to the world the ruthless persecution and inhumanity as practiced by the Nazis in the hope that such barbarism would never happen again. For those of us dedicated to learning and teaching the Holocaust and keeping the memories alive, these artworks are priceless, invaluable, and irreplaceable. My father wrote a diary for me at the time of my birth in Israel. I learned the courageous stories of a heroine, my mother Hildegard Tausig, who survived Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Christianstadt, and escaped from the death march and living as a German girl under the nose of the Nazis. And I read about the remarkable life of an artist who had survived the Lodz Ghetto, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Gleiwitz I, and the death march to Blechhammer. The photos are from my father's first post-war exhibition on January 27, 1946, in the town hall of Český Dub, Czechoslovakia. He reflects on his exhibition and the deportation to the Lodz Ghetto with his first wife, Matilda, and child, Miriam, who I was named after. He had to overcome his crippling grief to build a new life. He writes about befriending a young woman, his future wife, Hilda, and her assistance in hanging the exhibition. The scenes were of appalling hunger and destitution in the Lodz Ghetto. The Polish pronunciation is Łódź. David Friedman was a prolific artist with many talents. The will and drive I saw in him carried over in my life. He was born in Marisch-Ostrau in 1893 in Austria-Hungary, today Ostrava, Czechia. He apprenticed as a sign painter and ventured to Berlin at 17, where he studied painting with Lovis Corinth and etching with Hermann Struck. Then World War I, the first of many life-changing interruptions in his career. He served as a battle artist in the Austro-Hungarian army on the Russian front. At the end of World War I, he automatically became a Czech citizen. He returned to Berlin and was a successful painter and graphics artist, renowned for portraits drawn from life. He exhibited at the Akademie der Kunst, the Berliner Secession, and numerous galleries in Germany and Czechoslovakia. This rare painting belonged to an art dealer and gallery owner in Cologne, Germany, who specialized in artists from the 1920s. The view of his studio shows a promise of a young artist with a brilliant future, but survives as a memento from his shattered world. His portraits of world-famous chess masters created a sensation and launched a secondary career as a leading press artist in the 1920s and early 1930s. He produced hundreds of portraits of famous contemporary personalities from the arts, music, theater, sports, politics, and industry, the likes of Albert Einstein, Max Lieberman, Arnold Schoenberg, Yehudi Menuhin, and Thomas Mann. Also, friends were portrayed, among them Elizabeth and James Rothstein. Rothstein played his last concert in May 1941 in Berlin. In November, he was deported to the Lodz Ghetto, where he was murdered. His wife, Elizabeth, escaped to Palestine. The portraits turned up in Israel. My father thought these were the only original portraits to survive from more than 2,000. Their location today is unknown. When Hitler came to power in 1933, David Friedman was banned from his profession, a huge blow to a man who lived for his art. As a Czech citizen, he was permitted to establish a business renovating buildings until this too was prohibited. Discoveries would show he did not completely forsake his art, as is in this example of the great opera singer Alexander Kipnis. At the end of 1938, the Friedman family left everything behind in Berlin and fled to Prague. My father only had his artistic talent as a means to survive. He produced portraits of leading Zionists, officials, and personalities in the Jewish community from 1940 to 1941. More than 100 portraits were recovered and discovered from this series. His left behind artwork in Berlin was looted by the Gestapo. This is a page from my father's album. Sometimes he wrote names and captions on portraits and pages. The artist's signature was part of the print. This would be the artist's signature. Note the blue ink signature by Dr. Singer. This shows this is an original print. These postcard-sized prints, in some cases, were found in multiples, but how this discovery unfolded will be explained in my next presentation. Oskar Singer was a very important man. He was the chief director of the Prague Jüdische Nachrichtenblatt, where my father also had some of his works published. And he was deported to the Lodz Ghetto, where he was the chief editor of the Chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto, 1941-1944. On October 16th, 1941, the Friedman family was sent on the first transport from Prague to the Lodz Ghetto. In this deportation scene, the mother and child in center back bear a striking resemblance to Matilda and Miriam Helene. I think when my father drew the scene, he thought of them. I transition forward to my father's liberation to show his poster art from deportation to the Lodz Ghetto and several concentration camps until liberation. He was liberated at Blechhammer by the Red Army on January 25, 1945, at 51 years, an age significantly older than most survivors. In his 1945 diary, he wrote in German, "Apart from the consequences to the Jews, for my poor family, the evacuation to the ghetto lodge gave my eyes, my inner being, a new direction. I saw something new, something that never happened before in this century. I experienced this tragedy not only with my eyes, but buried it into my inner being, into my memory, to tear out at a more peaceful time. These were powerful images that I saw, to give form to all that misery, to show it to the world. This was always my intent. I will be using my father's quotes from testimonies and his 1945 diary and show related artwork to these memories. He writes, after a great deal of nerve-wracking incidents, we were hauled out of the apartment with some baggage, loaded onto a truck and transported to the Prague exhibition hall. Hundreds of people were lying on the floor, and horrible things played out during the whole night and next day. The first Prague transport to Ghetto-Miriam was being prepared by the Gestapo. My father paints an atmosphere filled with foreboding. One sees and feels the despair in the faces of these people as they wait for their fate with their permitted baggage. Note the patches with names sewn on the bundles. And I believe this painting sets the mood for the rest of the artwork that my father draws and paints. He writes, on the way to a concentration camp, children, adults, accompanied by soldiers with fixed bayonets, walk with all their baggage to the train where 1,000 Jews are pushed in like sardines. It is unnecessary to describe what went on in a completely sealed car for 2 days and 2 nights, and this was just the beginning. Windows were not permitted to be open. At last, Radagast, a suburb of Lodz, and again we went on foot to the Forsting Ghetto. There we were brought into a small children's school. 1,000 people occupied the classrooms, stairwells, hallways, and dropped themselves again on the bare, hard floor. Preparation for arrival had not been made by the ghetto administration. First, we lived off of what we had taken along. Later, turnip soup was provided. Even later came wooden cots, whereby 3 were stacked on top of each other. This drawing, Nothing in His Pot, was produced after the war in 1948, and the model was his friend and Lodz Ghetto survivor, Alfred Dub. "70 adults and 17 children lived in my room. The supplies were partially depleted. Thieves forced their way into our luggage and took everything. Exhaustion, hunger overcame us, and we saw many people not wake up anymore. Those who could work were able to buy something to eat. Soon the children's toilets were too small. The cleaning was a catastrophe. Sicknesses were the rule, under which we suffered greatly. Again, many more from our transport died." In 1978, at the age of 84, with the help of a magnifying glass, my father typed a short account from his 1940 handwritten post-war diary and addressed it to, "Dear reader, about Tilda and my child, I can only say that they were brave. She was prepared to take on the difficult fight in the ghetto with me because it meant life or death. My art helped provide us with better living possibilities. In the ghetto, we found ourselves in a very desperate situation." The victims from the transfers were completely unprepared for what awaited them. They faced squalid, crowded living conditions, winter weather with no heat and little food. The rooms were only 4 walls without running water or any other amenities. There was little room for belongings or privacy. And this is why I believe my father used the title, "A Little Happiness Around the Oven" during a sad time in Lodz Ghetto. The oven provided a little heat. After a 10-day stay in the ghetto, I already made myself indispensable to the collective as an artist. I took over the artistic direction of the jewelry department, which was founded by the Prague Jews. Later, this was affiliated to the Department of Metal II. There I designed cigar and cigarette cases, powder compacts, bracelets, pendants for watches, so-called jewelry, brooches, rings, etc. At first, this matter was strange for me, and it appeared difficult, but I dug my teeth into it, and soon I found acknowledgement. Further, in my free time, I worked for myself. Collective was the word used for the community formed by people arriving on the same transfer to Lodz. My father wrote, everyone had to work. From the collective of the first transit from Prague, a working group formed goldsmiths and engravers, and they needed me. We created something new for the ghetto. We were acknowledged and given workrooms and food. My father also mentioned Abraham in his diary, without a last name. He was a student in the Lodz Ghetto, and they met again in Birkenau. I tracked them down and learned new information, including that my father sketched his portrait and other boys in metal too. He wrote, he often made designs for badges that were used in the ghetto, such as for the firefighters and doctors. The designs were transferred to brass metal sheets and cut out with fret saws. The horrific hunger and destitution were the main subjects of my father's artwork. People were so weak, they could not get up from the streets. Quote, in the unending misery, I found motives that always interested me, with death before my eyes. Through hunger and sickness, I worked strenuously on a series of drawings, etchings, and paintings which documented our fates, end quote. Children selling cigarettes and self-made candy in the streets of Lodz Ghetto, 1941 through 1944. Food played the biggest role in the ghetto. This is an everyday scene of starving children peddling on the streets. This is a letter dated September 19, 1972 to fellow Lodz Ghetto survivor and friend Heinz Koenig. Dear Heinz, as you know, the victims of the Nazis had to steal food wherever they found it, for they were always hungry, and in this case, I frequently observed this in the Lodz Ghetto, where I was with my family and have, like so many others, kept this in my thoughts, especially of the large kitchen where cooking was prepared for the masses. Many potato peelings and similar were thrown out. However, it was strongly forbidden to steal from the garbage, since it brought disease. Although it was prohibited, this was still done by many. This is an etching that my father produced in 1967. It's actually very similar to two other works that he produced, one in 1945, which is now in Yad Vashem, called Hunger, and one that he produced in 1964 in the collections of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Eating in a public kitchen or eating at home in the Lodz Ghetto, the consequences were the same. Many Jews died every day from hunger and disease. Dear reader, in my diary, which had been left behind in Birkenau, I described the Führer, Rumkowski, instated by the Germans and his advisors as the guilty. They in turn said that the Germans did not allow enough provisions into the ghetto. This is one of many scenes of hunger of people on the streets of the Lodz Ghetto. After the jewelry department was dissolved in spring 1942, David Friedman began to work in the statistics department. He joined other Czech authors writing in their diaries. He planned to publish his diary at war's end. He felt unless you lived it, no one would believe the brutal inhumanity against the Jews. How does one describe harrowing experiences? He filled the diary with illustrations to show the daily infernal struggle of their desperate situation, life in the face of death. His art and diary would be his testimony and speak for the victims, but they were destroyed. This drawing was made at the request of his friend and fellow survivor, Alfred Dupp. He wrote, "They always wore the Jewish black robes, and lice were usually crawling down their robes, so they were quite visible. That stuck in my mind. I asked Dave to make me a sketch so I could reproduce it in ceramic." This drawing is called Fecalists, and it shows human waste removers hauling a sewage tank on their wagon in the Lodz Ghetto. Because I live with them, I remember all our struggles with hard winters and hunger. The faces show the despair of the victims and their hopeless situation. After the closing down of this children's school, the Friedman family moved to Bierstrasse 16 in April 1942. The name came from the Polish name Piwna. Here he produced an album of 50 drawings, children and youths of the ghetto, landscape, still life, interiors. Here he drew and painted his family, and here he developed his first attempts to depict the absorbed impressions in color. These are newcomers in the Lodz Ghetto pulling a carriage. My father continues with this description. In the background is a Catholic church. But at that time, it was a storage for bed feathers taken by force from the Jews by the Nazis in that region. The wood bridge went to another part of the ghetto, and the street under the bridge was only for Germans. Watching soldiers were every 100 feet, end quote. The pedestrian bridge symbolizes the daily struggle of the Jews as they made their way to work. In this drawing, you can see the somber expressions on the faces of the two men next to a barbed wire fence and the watching Schutzpolizei, protection police, at his post holding a rifle with bayonet. Dear reader, the Germans had posters taped up on all the streets that we were prohibited to leave the ghetto. Those who tried would be immediately shot. I saw this with my own eyes at the German fence. However, it never occurred to me to climb over the fence. This would have been insanity. Ultimately, there was no other choice except to continue on our path of suffering. All persons, including children from the upcoming transit, were ordered to the large marketplace. This was the execution of Jews in the Lodz ghettos on September 7th, 1942. At the Beludi marketplace, 18 Jews were executed by hanging in one day. The action was ordered by the German Gestapo administration, Hans Bibel, because they tried to escape. Two Lodz Ghetto inmates on a water pump. This is where I did our washing in summer and winter. There was a pump in the yard that supplied the water. One came down from whatever floor one lived with, a bucket, and turned the pump wheel and filled the buckets. Forced labor in the ghetto. A wagon filled with bricks pulled by 10 starving, exhausted Jews guarded by a German soldier with a fixed bayonet. You can see the factories in the background and the smoke coming out. Finally, after decades of searching and wondering if anything of my father's work would possibly have survived, I was rewarded. At a conference at the University of Lodz in 2004, I learned that David Friedman was a contributor to the Chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto, 1941-1944, one of the most important documents of Holocaust literature. By a chance introduction, I met Dr. Sasha Feuchert, who described an unknown Polish part of the Chronicle, found in the attic of the State Archives in Lodz. Over a period of several months, beginning in May 1942, the Chronicle was typed on special paper for the purpose of printing a header. On the top of the page appeared an etching of a Lodz Ghetto bridge by David Friedman. The chroniclers wrote several versions of their daily entries, and only one of these versions displayed the bridge. The texts were known, but not the pages with the bridge by David Friedman. This newspaper had no readers in the ghetto, but was made for readers of the future. The extent to which my father was aware that his etching was being put to such use remains unknown. David Friedman's etching of the Lodz Ghetto Bridge was published in a new 5-volume German edition of the Chronicle in 2007, and in 2009, it was featured on the book cover of the Polish version of the Chronicle. At the same conference, I learned about Oscar Rosenfeld's entry in his diary on December 25th, 1943, written in the context of an evaluation of the work of the ghetto artists. David Friedman, the only one from the West, has a clear and sharp manner of drawing. He is attracted to what is illustrated in humans and landscape. In 2006, I was alerted by Neve Goldberg, then the art department collections manager at Yad Vashem, that he found contact photos, drawings by my father. They depict various forms of work in the hat manufacturing workshop and were part of an album made documenting the activities of this ghetto workshop, also called Resort. There was a network of factories, cheap war production for the Germans in the ghetto. Many such albums were made, typically presented as gifts to Chaim Rumkowski, the chairman of the Lodz Ghetto Judenrat, or consul. The photos were probably by Mendel Grossman and were labeled in Yiddish. The slide shows one of 2 pages of contact photos, and the drawing here is been enhanced so you can see the damage and the poor quality. Nevertheless, this is astonishing evidence of my father's work in the ghetto. I was thrilled. I tried to find the original album and connected with researchers and institutes to no avail. And then in 2019, the historian Eva Vieter discovered the original album at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. It was miraculous. 33 priceless drawings survived under those terrible conditions during the last days of the Lodz Ghetto. We couldn't be more excited, and it was so incredible. Many of the drawings were colorized. Eva recently said, "Miracles happened when we worked together." The top left drawing is called Trade School, and this one was titled Machine That Produces a Thread. And of course, we have the model hats that decorate the website of the Jewish Historical Institute. The album is made of stiff leather covers and is dedicated to Aaron Jakobowitz, chairman of the Office of Labor Departments. After the war, it was unearthed at Ludomerska Street in Lodz and handed over to the Central Jewish Historical Commission. From 1948, it is in the collections of the Jewish Historical Institute. One of the drawings is the founder of and director David Nachstern. The other 2 portraits in the album were managers Jacob Skolnick and Abram Szymanska. Two more drawings. Now, I just was, in some of the drawings, my father highlighted the pieces that they were working on, which I thought was very effective. Another miraculously preserved original drawing from the album, Hats of Feathers. My father made these drawings in soft, beautiful tones in contrast to his powerful post-war Holocaust art. Perhaps he was asked to show the people's willingness to work. After all, their lives depended on work in the factories. No work, no food applied to adults as well as children in the Lodz Ghetto. Here are examples of seems to be a young girl here and a young girl here, working very hard. David Friedman's legacy fascinates with stories entwined with his artwork. An amazing twist to the discovery is thanks to Aaron Krochmalnik, who is in the audience today. He saw a resemblance of a portrayed subject, his aunt Fecala Krochmalnik, and he sent a photo. This is a cutout from her ID, which shows that she is working in the hat department as a millionaire. And this is a close-up, and you can see Fecala over here with her beautiful hair piled on top, and the subject of the drawing with the same hair, similar features, and a very good possibility that this is the subject indeed. What a find, and a special connection to Aaron. At undetermined intervals, the Gestapo roll commando would suddenly appear and block the quarter. All had to line up in the street, no matter what circumstances one found oneself in. Selection. Some were taken from their beds, forced out, wearing only their nightshirts with the revolver in hand. The officer chose his victims. Those with bad luck were forced on the open truck already standing at attention. Because I dug a large hole under a crumbly wall, we were able to hide in times when danger threatened, eluding annihilation several times. And this is a complete drawing. The bridge painted in the background personified the ghetto tragedy as terrified Jews try to flee the Nazi roundup. My father seemed to have painted himself and his wife on the side. This is my father, his wife and child. But he didn't say it was him. But he would use himself as a model, as I often witnessed at the time he produced his second series. It's a very powerful painting. Cattle train to Auschwitz-Birkenau. We were pushed and pressed like sardines, and the conditions inside were terrible. We could hardly breathe. 3 days without food, too. I will never forget this trip. It was like a hell, and it was only the beginning. As the Lodz Ghetto was liquidated, my father was separated from his family and sent to Auschwitz. He was on this last train on August 29, 1944. My father rolled up his paintings and brought his diary to Auschwitz, where the victims were ordered to leave everything on the train ramp. Whatever I still had in the way of underwear, clothes, paintings, and other valuables, including the children's album, documents, a part of your things, letters of recommendation, and the precious diary, which I had been writing for 3 years, and which I later wanted to present to a publisher, reworked with the drawings, the life and experiences of an artist and his family in the ghetto. For at least 2 days and 2 nights, we stood in a group of men outdoors. 1,000-watt lamps lit the night. It was forbidden to lie down. We steadied ourselves, supported ourselves, and slept standing. Our brains were empty, eroded. I could not think, nor could I feel hunger. Whoever caved in, fell down, was removed like a piece of wood and never seen again. My father knew he would not survive under these conditions. There were no calls for artists. After 2 weeks, a call for musicians, and he volunteered and passed and was sent to the subcamp Gleiwitz I. He was not successful, competing with the likes of violinists from the Prague Philharmonic. He improvised with primitive materials to paint a mural across the barracks wall to show the SS officers his artistic ability and spare his life. Painting was his oxygen and gave him a reason to live. Death march from Camp Gleiwitz I to Camp Blechhammer. It took us 48 hours to reach the next Camp Blechhammer in Upper Silesia, Germany, but the flight we took turned out to be a death march. That meant anyone who fell of weakness was shot down pitilessly. And here, another view of the same death march. Note, my father depicted himself with the man with the eyeglasses. He wanted to express that he was not just an eyewitness, but also a victim. After his liberation, my father made his way back to Prague in June 1945, sick and with a nervous breakdown. He was determined to fulfill his vow to paint the atrocities he witnessed and produce his first series of 30 drawings. When materials became available, he began to paint. My mother, Hilda, was often his model. Friends and family, mostly survivors of concentration camps, celebrate the Jewish wedding of Hildegard Tausig and David Friedman. Her father, Karl, is to her right. And this is Roman Hoodie, the best man. He crafted the gold wedding rings. My father and Roman Hoodie were on the same transport in 1941 to the Lodz Ghetto. Roman and my father belonged to the founding of the jewelry department in the ghetto. The marriage of my parents began at a refugee's pace. High-ranking military officers wanted my father's Holocaust art for the War Museum, but he had other plans. He defied an export prohibition and bribed a sympathetic official who stamped his paintings approved for export. It was dangerous to antagonize a Stalinist regime known for their anti-Semitic activities. The couple fled communist Czechoslovakia to Israel to begin again. Their first residence was this tent camp. And finally, they moved to their new home in Hada Yosef. My father worked in advertising for 2 years and then for himself. He also freelanced for the newspapers. He contributed to the founding of Israel's commercial art industry. Sympathetic to the impoverished Jews who had immigrated from Yemen, he portrayed beggars on the streets to show their plight. He produced portraits and painted landscapes, also Jewish, Christian, and Muslim sites. Decades later, I had immense pleasure tracking down the dramatically changed scenery he painted, now difficult to find or non-existent. David Friedman had captured the landscape of the beginning of the Jewish state. Finally, my father had to make the decision to leave Israel. It was in a poor economic situation, and he had a young family to support. Despite his age of 61 years, he had to stretch his ambitions to America. He had to forget about what was hidden in his heart, the pictures from the Lodz Ghetto and concentration camps. This is one of several paintings in a series from his fleeing Czechoslovakia to Israel and to the United States. After 15 months in America, he became head painter at the St. Louis branch of General Outdoor Advertising. He painted the iconic Budweiser Clydesdales and Happy Folks selling beer on 2-story tall billboards. He received honor and recognition in this new career. We became American citizens in 1960, changing the surname spelling to Friedman with 1 N. After retirement in 1962, his art could no longer be silent. My father continued to fight anti-Semitism and race hatred through painting the horrors he could not erase from his memory. In the front row are 2 Jewish couples with their children huddled together. My father wrote, "People in the background are standing in line in front of a food distribution. But some are turned back, disappointed because supplies ran out. In the meantime, people were starving, which is what Hitler wanted." End quote. Also in the background is a bent woman on the stairs and two men on the street. These are the final touches on his last drawing of his second series, which went on exhibition in St. Louis, Missouri and Baltimore, Maryland, perhaps among the first Holocaust art exhibitions in the United States. His legacy is a gift to the world and should be utilized to teach the lessons of the Holocaust. His artwork shows a reality that we must never turn away from. From the depths of despair to painting beautiful landscapes, a triumph of life and creativity. And he continued to experiment and change his style. My father persevered and transformed tragedy into a creative and meaningful life. He continued to paint and play his beloved violin until shortly before his death in St. Louis on February 27, 1980, at the age of 86. I hope to have a presentation about my mother Hilda's story. She wrote a diary and testimony about her experiences, never forgetting those she left behind. My mother was dedicated to Holocaust remembrance and my father's art, speaking at schools and organizations. She died in 1989 at 67 years. Almost lost in history, David Friedman has been recognized for his important contributions to Holocaust history and the art world. I strongly feel my father's presence. He triumphed over the Nazis' complete destruction of his art and legacy. And I'm so excited to announce that work has started on a documentary film by John Rakosny with the working title, Dear Miriam, The Art and Survival of David Friedman. Thanks very much for your attention. If you'd like to contact me, please feel free and join my public page, David Friedman, Artist as Witness. And if you'd like to take a snapshot of the websites, or you can just Google David Friedman 1893, and you will see some of his artwork that I talked about today. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Wow. I have to say, we started talking a few months ago, and I'm just so happy about this series. And I'm so happy that we have your father's story through this presentation. And we have one more presentation in 2 weeks. We're really not finished. There's a lot of talk in the chat room. So I wanted to share just a little bit of what people are saying. There are also a few questions. So for one moment, I'm going back. For some reason, it jumped when I talked. Okay, so first of all, Diane Hershkovitz is saying that she has a copy of the Chronicle of the Lodz Ghetto. And it's signed, and I don't know if I can say the name well, but it's Lukan Dubowski. So we
Lucian
also
Dobroshitsky.
Thank you, Dobroshitsky.
Yes.
So Miriam, if you didn't know that, then maybe you want to make contact. Secondly, there's a question by Miriam Marcus. How was your father's work chosen for display at the Holocaust Museum in Yad Vashem, and which pieces are displayed there? So if you'd like to share a little about that, about the exhibitions.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I actually am going to be talking on the next presentation how I discovered my father's works in Yad Vashem and how they got from Czechoslovakia to Eretz Israel in 1946. It's a whole story. The drawings that are there are 3 that are on display. One is called is a ghetto boy. That's what I call him. That's not the. And then there's another scene of the roll call in Gleiwitz I, or in Auschwitz actually. And the other one is of a sick man prisoner in Gleiwitz I. And those are the 3 that are on permanent display. Yad Vashem has 7 in total. The others are in the archives. Thank you for asking that question.
And we'll be talking about that more.
About it because it's it's not a very well-known story. It's about Ziv Shek, and he was the head of the Jewish Agency for Palestine and the documentation project of collecting works to show the persecution of the Nazis. And this is what I'm going to talk about. And I had known bits and pieces of this, and I still today, as of today, still trying to learn more about it. And the exhibition that was at the Bezalel Museum in Jerusalem in 1946, 1947. So all these things are very exciting now, and are, I'm hoping to get to speak about that next time.
Wonderful. Felicia Anchor is saying that her aunt worked in the lingerie factory, and that she was taken, that they took her and the factory workers away, and we have no idea what happened to them. So we see that people are still searching for family. I would suggest, again, maybe going to the Jewish Heritage Institute in Warsaw to start there, maybe, and also Yad Vashem, that there may be someone who wrote a page. So that's one thing that they could do to try to find out about what happened to the people in the lingerie factory. So that's my suggestion for Felicia. There is someone here who wrote to me directly that said that she teaches about the diaries from the Lodz Ghetto to students throughout the US. Is it possible to access any of this work in my teaching? Are these pieces available? Through your webpage, right, Miriam?
Well, his diary that he wrote in the ghetto is destroyed. And the one, he said he wrote a lot of diaries. Right. The one in the ghetto is destroyed. Then when he was liberated, after he started almost immediately, a few days later, starting to write down on little pieces of paper. And in the beginning, it was dedicated to his wife and child, so they would know their history, because he didn't quite believe yet that they were gone at that moment. And that's why some of the quotes I was writing like he was writing it to his daughter, his first daughter. So no, his diary is not available, that one. And the one that he did post-war is donated to the Leo Beck Institute. It's not available online, but if she's interested, I could send her excerpts, that I've translated. It's not translated either.
Right.
We're working on it. I'm still working on it. It needs to be translated to English.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here we go. We have a project. She was also asking about the works. I suggest that everyone go to your website and also go to the Facebook page, because you're posting almost every day new information.
Right. She can message me. I'd be happy to send her artwork for her use.
Wonderful. And of course, Aaron also made a comment. He said, it's a miracle that I discovered this amazing drawing from the wonderful artist and father of Miriam. It's one of the only testimonials which is left from my Aunt Fecalists, who ended up, I don't know what the word was, it says up shop in Baltic Sea, or was sent to after Auschwitz and Stuttgart. So it's a miracle. And I'm just going down further to see I'll send you all the comments anyway, but there's a wonderful comment about how the drawings, etchings, and paintings are extremely moving. Someone said even visceral. There's an authenticity and emotion that is very powerful. It really is another way of talking about how we remember the Lodz Ghetto, for sure. That's my addition. Thank you for archiving your father's work and for sharing this with us. My mother, a physician and Christian, was born and lived in Lodz until her arrest in 1945 by the Gestapo and her imprisonment in various concentration camps. I feel a very special connection to Lodz, and to all of this history, and we'll never forget the great suffering of Jews who were from or were deported to Lodz. Your father's amazing and powerful work and your efforts to preserve and promote this art helps to ensure that none of this tragic history will be forgotten. And thank you. I'll send you all the chat because there's so many things here.
Thanks for the very nice comments
as well. Just going down, everyone, of course, is saying thank you for the program, of course. And of course, about the presentation and the work you're doing. And so with that, I don't see another question. I'm just checking. Oh, again, I'm asking about his art, and you answered, Susan, that yes, his art is available and you should be in touch with each other.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Also, someone is saying that in 2006, they saw an exhibit at the Lodz Ghetto, on the Lodz Ghetto at the Jewish Heritage Museum in Atlanta. There were some charcoal drawings, but I'm not sure who the artist was. I wonder if you're
not my father. No, it wasn't my father.
Your father. That you know.
I've been, you know, it's one of the hardest things is to get to have a venue for an exhibition. It's not easy. And
also Evo, someone is suggesting that maybe you should check with Evo because they also have artwork.
Oh no, I was in every I was everywhere. I was already everywhere.
No stone was unturned.
No stone. But you know what? I still get surprised. I
can imagine you still get surprised. Absolutely.
And when that comment about working together is very important because what happens is when I make a discovery, I let everybody know, especially researchers and historians, because sometimes they're digging for something else and then they find something. And this has been the wonderful joy of all of this. I've made tremendous connections as far as, and made friends around the world because of my father's artwork. And it's been it's fascinating, and I'm still finding and I'm still learning, and I don't think that will ever end.
Miriam, can you add your website to the chat box? Someone is asking for that now.
I don't have access to it, but that last slide, I'll put that last slide.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So anyone who wants to go get in contact with Miriam, you have the contact information.
You have my email. I'm also
and the website.
Yes, and if you Google me, you'll find me. So welcome.
Right, and again, someone is asking, how did some of the artwork survive? That's going to be the next program. It's called Treasure. Right. This is a conversation between Liz Ellsby, the art expert, and our daughter of David Friedman, and how they're going to talk about how Miriam discovered where these pieces are and is continuing to discover. And someone like Aaron, who can add pieces to that information by discovering his aunt in a picture to help make it even richer. And someone also wrote, Frank Smilovich said, by looking at your father's pictures, it brings me much closer to my own family that did not survive. So here we see another important element to artwork, is that it brings people's stories together, even shared stories.
Well, so this is one of my father's wonderful talents, is that he brings the people into his work because of the emotion and because of the, the realistic, the expressions on the faces. People relate to that, and they stand in front of my father's artwork. I've seen this, and they just don't move. They just stand there and feel the painting. And I just wish my father could, have seen all the interest in his work.
Absolutely. People are asking if there's artwork in here, there. People want to know if they can go somewhere to see things. Again, I think at the next program in 2 weeks, you'll also be able to share with us where we can actually find artworks. And I think going to your website will be very helpful as well. And with that, I want to say thank you again to Miriam for the third program and this amazing homage to your father and his artwork and your own journey as well. Thank you so much for sharing. I can't believe you condensed it down to one presentation. But
I really,
I don't think anyone really understands.
Anybody realizes what
no one realizes. I'm just saying that there's so much more, and hopefully with the next program, we'll be able to add a little more, and we will just have to do this over and over again until we finish the whole story, because it's so rich and so complicated. And of course, through the
yes, this is the truth. There's so many twists and turns and different levels of my father's life and art that he wrote that just on the Lodz Ghetto, he could have written a 200-page book, but sadly he never did, because people forget that back in those days, this was in the 60s, for example, nobody was really interested in the life of an artist in the Lodz Ghetto. He tried. And that's what so makes it, this what makes me so emotional today, is that this is a little bit of justice for him, that there is interest in his work today, and he is recognized. And that makes me feel that my work is, to that end, is very satisfying. And I'm very grateful also for all the interest from all of you in my father's artwork. And I hope to get to meet some of you, and feel free to contact me.
Wonderful. So thank you again. I want to say shalom to everyone, and I want to wish everyone a pleasant Sunday, wherever you are. Make it pleasant. We have no choice.
Bye.
And Miriam, tada.
Thank you.